The blood pooled crimson against the snow, each drop a stark reminder that even in this vast wilderness of Montana territory, there was no escape from the violence that had consumed the frontier. Sarah Mackenzie pressed her trembling fingers against the stranger's chest, feeling his heartbeat flutter like a wounded bird beneath her palm. His dark eyes, fierce even in unconsciousness, spoke of a proud heritage that the government was determined to crush. She should have left him there to die. That's what any sensible woman would have done in 8. Sarah had ventured out only because their last cow had broken through the fence again, and Papa's rheumatism kept him bedridden more often than not these days. At 19, she'd grown accustomed to shouldering responsibilities that would have broken most women her age, but the harsh realities of frontier life had forged her into something stronger than steel. She found him collapsed against an outcropping of granite, his breathing shallow and labored. Blood seeped through a makeshift bandage wrapped around his shoulder, and his clothes, traditional buckskin adorned with intricate beadwork, marked him immediately as Lakota. Her heart hammered against her ribs. The newspapers were full of stories about savage Indians, about massacres and raids, about the government's determination to force every last warrior onto reservations. But as she knelt beside him, studying the sharp angles of his face and the way his black hair fell across his forehead, she saw only a man in desperate need of help. His skin was pale beneath its natural bronze, and when she touched his forehead, it burned with fever. "Mama always said the Lord tests us in the strangest ways," she whispered to herself, then made a decision that would echo through generations. Getting him back to the house proved nearly impossible. He was tall and solidly built, all lean muscle and sinew, and completely unconscious. Sarah had to fashion a travois from broken fence posts and her own wool coat, dragging him through the snow while the wind howled around them like the voices of the dead. By the time she reached the small cabin she shared with her father and younger brother, her hands were raw and bleeding, and exhaustion weighed on her shoulders like a yoke. "Sarah?" Her father's voice drifted from the back room, weak but alert. "Yes, Papa, I'm back." She managed to get the wounded man onto the old cot they kept in the root cellar, a space that stayed warm enough to keep vegetables from freezing but was hidden from casual view. "Found our cow. She's in the barn now." It wasn't entirely a lie. She had found the cow eventually. She just hadn't mentioned the other discovery. For the next 2 days, she tended to him in secret. The bullet had passed clean through his shoulder, missing anything vital, but infection had set in. She cleaned the wound with boiling water and whiskey, applied poultices of wild herbs her mother had taught her to use before consumption claimed her 5 winters ago, and held vigil through the long, cold nights when his fever spiked and he called out in a language she didn't understand. On the 3rd morning, she descended into the root cellar to find him awake, watching her with eyes like chips of obsidian. He didn't move when she approached, but every muscle in his body was coiled tight, ready to spring. "Easy," she murmured, the same way she'd gentle a spooked horse. "I'm not going to hurt you." He studied her for a long moment, taking in her simple brown dress, her auburn hair braided practically down her back, the calluses on her hands that spoke of hard work and harder choices. When he finally spoke, his English was better than she'd expected, accented but clear. Why? The single word carried the weight of worlds. Why had she helped him? Why risk her family's safety? Why show mercy to someone her people called enemy? Sarah set down the bowl of broth she'd brought and met his gaze directly. "Because you needed help, and I could give it." Something shifted in his expression then, a crack in the armor of suspicion and pain. "I am Dakota, of the Oglala Lakota, Sarah Mackenzie." She offered a tentative smile. "And you're safe here, Dakota, for now." "Safe." He repeated the word like it was foreign to him, which perhaps it was. "There is no safe for my people anymore. The bluecoats hunt us like animals, drive us from our lands, force us onto reservations where we starve and die slowly." His voice carried a bitterness that made her chest ache. "I was running from their conscription. They want to make warriors of our young men to fight in their wars, to turn us against each other." Sarah had heard rumors of the government's new policies, desperate measures as tensions escalated across the territory. "Is that how you were hurt?" "Patrol caught my trail 3 days ago. I killed 2 of them." He said it, matter-of-factly, without pride or shame. "The 3rd one got lucky with his aim before I could reach cover." She should have been frightened. Any rational woman would have been terrified to learn she was harboring a man who had killed soldiers. Instead, she found herself leaning closer, drawn by something in his voice. Not violence, but the weary sadness of someone who had lost everything and was still fighting to protect what little remained. "What will you do now?" "Keep running. Try to reach my sister's band in the Black Hills." He attempted to sit up and immediately went pale, pressing a hand to his wounded shoulder. "If I can make it that far, you can't travel yet. You lost too much blood, and that wound isn't fully healed. I cannot stay. Every moment I remain puts you in danger." Their eyes met and held, and Sarah felt something shift inside her chest, like ice breaking up on a river in spring. There was honor in this man, a nobility that had nothing to do with birth or breeding, and everything to do with the choices he made when everything else was stripped away. She found herself wanting to smooth the worry lines from his forehead, to ease the pain that went deeper than any physical wound. One more day, she heard herself saying. Give your body one more day to heal. That afternoon, while her father napped and her 15-year-old brother Thomas worked on repairing harnesses in the barn, Sarah brought Lakota outside to sit in the weak winter sunlight. He moved stiffly but without assistance, and some of the gray pallor had left his face. Tell me about your home, she said, settling beside him on a fallen log. His face transformed as he spoke of the buffalo herds that once darkened the plains, of sacred ceremonies and star-filled nights around council fires, of a way of life that was disappearing like smoke on the wind. Sarah told him about her dreams of traveling east to study medicine, of helping people the way her mother had before illness claimed her, dreams that seemed impossible when every day was a struggle just to survive. You have healing hands, Lakota observed, watching her rewrap his bandage with gentle efficiency, and a healing heart. Their fingers brushed as she tied off the cloth, and the contact sent warmth shooting up her arm. When she looked up, she found him watching her with an intensity that made her breath catch. Sarah, he said her name like a prayer, like something precious. His hand came up to cup her cheek, thumb tracing the line of her cheekbone. In another world, in another time. This is the only world we have, she whispered back, but she didn't pull away. The kiss was inevitable as sunrise, soft and tentative at first, then deeper as she leaned into him. He tasted like wild honey and promises that couldn't be kept, and when they finally broke apart, Sarah felt as though something fundamental had shifted in the universe. They spent the evening talking in hushed voices, sharing stories and dreams and the kind of profound connection that transcends language and culture. Lakota told her about the vision that had come to him in a fever dream during his worst night, a woman with hair like autumn leaves who would show him that love could bridge any divide. Sarah felt tears prick her eyes as she recognized herself in his words. I have to leave tomorrow, he said as the moon rose full and silver overhead. I've already stayed too long. I know, the words tasted like ashes in her mouth. Come with me. The offer hung between them like a bridge spanning an impossible chasm. Sarah's heart leaped at the thought, riding away from the grinding poverty and isolation of frontier life, exploring a world beyond the narrow confines of everything she'd ever known. But reality crashed down like an avalanche. I can't leave Papa and Thomas. They need me. Lakota nodded slowly, though pain flickered across his features. Your loyalty honors you. It is one of the things that makes you extraordinary. They made love that night in the root cellar, surrounded by the earthy scents of stored potatoes and preserved vegetables, with only a thin wool blanket between them and the cold. It was Sarah's first time, and Lakota was infinitely gentle, worshipping her body with his hands and mouth until she forgot everything except the sensation of being completely, utterly cherished. Afterward, they lay entwined, listening to each other breathe and pretending that dawn would never come. But dawn did come, as it always does, and with it came the thunder of approaching hoofbeats. Sarah jolted awake to the sound of shouting voices and her father's alarmed calls. Through the small window she could see a dozen blue-uniformed cavalry soldiers surrounding their property, rifles at the ready. Stay here, she whispered urgently to Lakota, who was already reaching for his weapons. Don't make a sound. She climbed the stairs to find chaos erupting in her kitchen. A stern-faced captain with steel-gray whiskers was interrogating her father, while Thomas stood white-faced in the corner, hands raised. Where is he? The captain demanded, his voice sharp with authority. We tracked the murdering savage's trail directly to your property. I don't know what you're talking about, Sarah said, fighting to keep her voice steady. There's been no one here but family. The captain's pale eyes fixed on her with predatory focus. Miss Mackenzie, harboring a fugitive is an act of treason against the United States government. The penalty is death by hanging. Sarah's knees nearly buckled, but she forced herself to stand straight. You're welcome to search the property, Captain. You'll find nothing. They did search, with brutal efficiency, tearing through every room and outbuilding. Sarah's heart hammered so hard she was certain they could hear it as they moved through the main house, then the barn, then finally approached the root cellar. The captain himself descended the narrow stairs, and Sarah held her breath until her lungs burned. He emerged minutes later, shaking his head. Nothing down there but vegetables and preserves. Relief flooded through her so powerfully she had to grip the doorframe to stay upright. Somehow, impossibly, Lakota had vanished, but the captain wasn't finished. Nevertheless, we have evidence that this family provided aid to a known enemy of the state. By order of territorial command, this property is hereby under military quarantine. No one enters or leaves without express permission. The next few hours passed in a blur of horror. More soldiers arrived, establishing a perimeter around their small homestead. Sarah, her father, and Thomas were essentially prisoners in their own home, watched constantly by guards who made it clear that any attempt to escape would result in immediate execution. As the sun began to set, painting the snow-covered landscape in shades of gold and crimson, Sarah stood at the kitchen window and wondered what had become of Lakota. Had he escaped? Was he lying wounded somewhere in the wilderness, slowly freezing to death? The uncertainty was agony. Sarah. Her father's voice was weak but urgent. He'd managed to pull himself from bed and now stood leaning heavily against the doorframe. I heard what you did. Her blood turned to ice. Papa. You did right, daughter. Your mother would have been proud. His weathered hand squeezed her shoulder. Some things are more important than safety. Tears she'd been holding back all day finally spilled over. I may have doomed us all, or you may have saved something worth more than our lives. That night, as Sarah lay sleepless in her bed, she became aware of subtle sounds outside, soft whispers that might have been wind through the pines, shadows that moved with too much purpose to be natural. She crept to the window and peered through a gap in the curtains. At first she saw nothing unusual. The soldiers maintained their posts, rifles ready, confident in their superiority. But as her eyes adjusted to the moonlight, she began to make out shapes moving through the tree line, figures dressed in traditional war paint and feathers, so perfectly camouflaged they seemed to be part of the forest itself. Her breath caught as she recognized the lead figure. Even in the dim light, even painted for war, she would know Lakota anywhere. He raised his hand toward her window, in a gesture that might have been greeting or goodbye, and she pressed her palm against the glass in response. What followed happened with the swift, terrible precision of a thunderstorm. The warriors struck simultaneously from three sides, moving like ghosts through the darkness. The first the soldiers knew of their presence was when their sentries simply disappeared, dragged silently into the woods without a sound. Sarah watched in horrified fascination as Lakota's war party systematically dismantled the military perimeter. They used no guns that would have brought reinforcements, but relied instead on traditional weapons and tactics that had been honed over generations of warfare. Within an hour, every soldier lay dead or unconscious, their weapons scattered, their arrogance shattered like ice in spring. Lakota appeared at her door just as she was pulling on her coat. I told you I could not stay, he said softly, though his eyes burned with an intensity that took her breath away. But I could not leave you to face the consequences alone. You came back for us. I came back for you, always for you. He stepped closer, close enough that she could see the war paint that hadn't quite disguised the love in his expression. The soldiers will send word of the attack, but it will take time for reinforcements to arrive. My people are preparing to move deeper into the mountains, to places the cavalry cannot follow, and you want us to come with you. It wasn't a question, but he nodded anyway. There is no safety for your family here now. When the army returns, they will assume you collaborated with us. Your father and brother will hang alongside you. Sarah looked back at the cabin that had been her whole world, at her father who was already struggling to dress himself with arthritic hands, at Thomas who was staring at the painted warriors with a mixture of fear and fascination. Papa can't make that kind of journey. He's too sick. My medicine woman is skilled beyond anything your doctors know, and we have horses, travois, ways of making the journey easier. Lakota's voice was gentle but urgent. Sarah, this is your only chance. All of your chances. The decision should have been impossible. Everything she'd ever known, ever been taught, told her that going with these savages was madness. But as she looked into Lakota's eyes, she saw her future reflected there. Not the grinding poverty and isolation she'd always known, but something larger, richer, full of possibilities she'd never dared imagine. Thomas, she turned to her brother, who was now 17 and old enough to make his own choices. What do you think? His young face was serious beyond his years. I think Mama always said love was the most powerful force in the world, and I think these people just risked their lives to save strangers. He looked at Lakota with newfound respect. If they'll have us, I say we go. Their father spoke from the doorway, wrapped in blankets but standing straighter than he had in months. I've lived my whole life afraid of change, afraid of anything different. It's taken me nowhere but this God-forsaken patch of dirt. His eyes found Sarah's, and held them. You've found something precious, daughter. Don't let fear steal it from you. The journey that followed was unlike anything Sarah could have imagined. They traveled by night through landscapes that seemed carved from dreams, towering peaks that scraped the belly of the sky, hidden valleys where hot springs steamed in the frigid air, ancient forests where the trees seemed to whisper secrets in languages older than human memory. Lakota's people welcomed them with a warmth that shattered every prejudice Sarah had ever been taught. Her father found new purpose helping to tend the horse herds, his lifetime of experience with animals earning him immediate respect. Thomas thrived in the physical challenges of nomadic life, growing stronger and more confident with each passing day. And Sarah discovered that love truly could transcend every boundary humans had ever created. She learned to speak Lakota, to weave traditional patterns, to read the stories written in the movement of clouds and the behavior of animals. The tribe's medicine woman, an ancient crone named Winona, whose eyes held the wisdom of centuries, took Sarah as her apprentice, teaching her healing arts that went far beyond anything she could have learned in any Eastern medical school. You have the gift, Winona told her one evening as they prepared medicines by firelight. Not just the knowledge, but the calling. The spirits chose you long before you chose this path. But perhaps most amazingly, Sarah found that her presence helped bridge a gap between two cultures that had been at war for decades. Other white settlers, frightened and displaced by the escalating conflict, began seeking refuge with Dakota's band. Some were turned away, but those who came with genuine need and open hearts were welcomed, creating a unique community that defied every convention of the time. "You are building something new," Dakota told her one night, as they lay beneath a canopy of stars so bright they seemed close enough to touch. They had been married in a traditional Lakota ceremony 6 months earlier, and Sarah's belly now carried the first proof of their union. Not white, not Indian, but something that takes the best of both worlds. "We are building it," she corrected, placing his hand over the gentle swell where their child grew. "All of us together." The baby came in early spring, during the season when the earth itself seemed to be giving birth to new life. Sarah labored through the night in a lodge filled with women from both cultures, supported by healing songs that seemed to ease her pain and give her strength. When her daughter finally emerged, perfect and beautiful, with her father's dark hair and her mother's green eyes, the old divisions seemed to melt away entirely. "What will you call her?" Winona asked, placing the squalling infant in Sarah's arms. Sarah looked down at her daughter's face, seeing in those unfocused eyes a future full of infinite possibility. "Ayana," she said, choosing the Lakota name that meant eternal blossom. "She will be living proof that love can create something entirely new." Years passed like the changing of seasons, each one bringing new challenges and new joys. The military eventually stopped hunting for them, distracted by larger conflicts and the simple impossibility of finding people who had become one with the landscape itself. Sarah's unique community grew, attracting others who had been displaced by the violence and hatred that seemed to consume the frontier. She became known throughout the territory as a healer who worked miracles, treating everyone who came to her regardless of the color of their skin or the circumstances of their birth. Her children, Ayana was followed by 2 sons and another daughter, grew up speaking both languages, comfortable in both worlds, living examples of what the future could look like if people chose love over fear. But perhaps the most profound change was in Sarah herself. The frightened frontier girl who had once dreamed of escaping to study medicine in the East had become something far more powerful, a bridge between worlds, a healer not just of bodies but of the deep wounds that divided human from human. On a warm evening in late summer, as she sat watching her children play with the other youngsters around the cooking fires, Dakota settled beside her with the easy grace of a man completely at peace with his choices. "Do you ever regret it?" he asked, though his tone suggested he already knew the answer. "The life you gave up, the world you left behind?" Sarah considered the question seriously, as she always did. Around them the camp bustled with the gentle activity of evening, elders telling stories, young people courting, families sharing the day's experiences. The air smelled of wood smoke and roasting meat and the infinite possibilities of tomorrow. "I didn't give up a life," she said finally, leaning into the warmth of his shoulder. "I found one. The real one. The one I was always meant to live." Dakota smiled and pressed a kiss to the top of her head. "The spirits knew what they were doing when they sent you to find me in the snow, or when they sent you to be found." In the distance, their daughter Ayana's laughter rang out like music, joined by the voices of children whose very existence proved that love was stronger than prejudice, that connection was more powerful than division, that the human heart had an infinite capacity to expand and embrace what once seemed impossible. As the stars emerged overhead, Sarah Mackenzie, now Sarah Crowfeather, medicine woman and mother, bridge builder and dream weaver, closed her eyes and sent a prayer of gratitude to whatever force had guided a frightened young woman to make a choice that changed not just her own life, but the very definition of what family could mean. Love, she had learned, was not about finding someone who fit into your existing world. It was about being brave enough to build an entirely new world together, one choice at a time, one day at a time, one generation at a time, and in that new world, beneath those eternal stars, anything was possible.